Blog Talk Radio.
93. County 23, I'll give you a corrected address, but we do have a fire in a one-story ordinary. Looks like it's about 40 by 120, 125. County 23, we'll get to traffic control. Squad 5, Squad 5. We'll go to 273, 273. We'll go Battalion 18, 18th Battalion. We'll go to 273, 273.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Fire Engineering Talk Radio and tonight's installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. Thanks for joining me tonight, and tonight is Tuesday, November 28th, 2017. I hope tonight finds you doing well. I hope things are well in your hometown volunteer fire department, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to listen in to tonight's show. I cannot believe we're at the end of November. I cannot believe we are entering the holiday season. Things are just flying by. I can't believe I'm coming to another year of doing the fire engineering shows. And the good news, for me anyway, and I hope for you, is that I'm not running out of ideas. I'm not running out of topics. I've got a whole list of ideas and people I want to get on the show in 2018, and I hope you'll join me throughout next year as well, because there is so much to talk about in our great volunteer fire service. And if you would like to reach out and talk to me, I encourage you. I welcome all emails. My email address, tamerrill63@aol.com. Give my Facebook page a like, the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. I'm on Twitter. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of, and I love talking fire service. I love talking about the great volunteer fire service. And yes, we have challenges, no doubt about it. But you know what? Again, I was just reminded 2 weeks ago, I was on the road in Delhi, New York, which is in the Oneonta, New York area, about 4.5 hours from where I live. I went and did a little presentation on professionalism for their fire department and some neighboring departments as well. And I got to tell you, I just met so many great people. It gives me great hope that the volunteer fire service will survive the challenges of today, will survive the challenges of tomorrow, because there's just so many great people out there that are meeting them head on, coming up with great ideas. And yes, we do struggle, absolutely, but we can put the resources together, we can put our brains together and really come up with some solutions. And again, I was just reminded 2 weeks ago doing my presentation that volunteer fire service is alive and well in a lot of areas. And there's a lot of great volunteer firefighters, a lot of great professional volunteer firefighters. And again, if you'd like to reach out to me, email tamerrill63@aol.com, Facebook page, the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. Heck, you can even friend me on my personal Facebook page, Tom Merrill. I don't care. You'll just see all the crazy pictures and videos that one of my 4 children like to post, and I'm okay with that. Because life is all about having fun. Hey, but I want to remind you before we go any further that tonight's show is sponsored by the Honeywell DuPont FDIC Scholarship Program. We want to thank them very much for helping us out. And what they're doing, Honeywell DuPont is providing an incredible opportunity for a deserving member that you may know, a deserving member of your department or from your hometown. Well, they're providing them with an opportunity to attend the premier fire training event in all the world, and that's FDIC in 2018. And it's all expenses paid. If you know someone you want to nominate, if you know someone that you think is deserving of a scholarship, if it's troublesome for you to send somebody from your department to FDIC, go to Honeywell DuPont FDICscholarship.com for all the information on how to nominate somebody. And again, people, all expenses paid. I'm talking airfare. I'm talking hotel. I'm talking registration to this premier training event. There's even a food stipend. So it's just such a great opportunity. Thank you to Honeywell DuPont for not only providing that opportunity, but for sponsoring our great fire engineering blog talk radio shows. However, please remember the nomination time is getting cut short. They're getting cut off at midnight, December 1st. So you have until midnight on December 1st to go to Honeywell DuPont FDICscholarship.com and nominate somebody who you think would be deserving of an all-expenses-paid trip to FDIC. Great opportunity. Thank you, Honeywell DuPont. Hey, if you'd like to call in and talk to us tonight, feel free. The number 760-454-8852. Would love to hear from you and talk about anything that's on your mind or about our main topic tonight, which is communication centers. Now, they're often overlooked in the fire operations and the emergency services operations. I happen to be a fire dispatcher in my hometown. That's my paid job, so I'm a little passionate about the subject. But the dispatchers, the call takers, many times they're called the first responders, because if you think about it, they really are. The minute they pick up that phone, they're the first one to have contact with the person needing help. And, right or wrong, the way they handle that call can determine the person needing the help and their family and people that are with them, their impression of the emergency services organization taking care of them. I say right or wrong because some things are out of their control, but a lot of things are under their control, and they can set the tone for a professional operation. So we want professional firefighters. That's what we've been talking about for several years now. Well, we also need professional dispatchers, professional call takers, professional supervisors. It all equates into the professional equation, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And I got a great guest that is perfectly qualified to do that. I'd like to welcome to the show Barry Furey, who has 45 years in the public safety world, a large part of it involved in communications. He has managed large-scale communication centers in 4 different states. He has seen what works. He knows what doesn't work. And he recently was the former director of the Raleight-Drake Emergency Communication Center in North Carolina. He is expert and provides consulting and training in emergency communications. He's a contributing editor to Firehouse Magazine, and I'm proud to say, just last month he was inducted into the Firehouse Hall of Fame at the Firehouse Expo in Nashville, Tennessee. Excellent, prestigious honor, and just so excellently deserved, and just well done. He's also a lifetime member of the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials, known as APCO. We're going to talk a little bit about what that might be. Oh, and also, he's also one of us. He has served as a fire officer in 3 states in 3 volunteer fire departments. And I'm glad to welcome him here tonight about the very important role that the Emergency Communication Center, again, call takers, dispatchers, the first responders, that important role they all play in getting us the resources that are needing and helping run an operation smoothly and efficiently. Barry, are you there? Welcome to the show.
I am, Tom. Thanks for having me. And it's really sort of fortuitous that we scheduled this evening well in advance because in your lead-in, you talked about the importance of communications personnel to effective public safety operations, and that they are indeed the first responders. And as you mentioned, as a former fire officer, I certainly recognize not only the impact that the first person who talks to the citizen has on their impression of the responders, but also the difference that it can make on the response itself. It's very difficult, and sometimes this is overlooked, to recover from either bad information or bad dispatch that's gathered on the front end. If the incident commander is responding with the improper units to the wrong address with bad information, things typically don't get better from there very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So the importance of gathering the correct information. And there's a lot of things that impact that, which we're going to get into tonight, because some people might not understand that there's 3 or 4 other emergency calls coming in, or they're short-staffed, or just so many other things can affect that dispatcher getting the quality information that they really need to pass on. And Barry, before we do that, and I'm so excited to talk to you tonight because there's so much I want to cover, why don't you give everyone a little background of how you got involved in communications, or did you start out as a firefighter somewhere, and what path did you take to getting this honor that you had in Nashville, being installed in the Firehouse Wall of Fame or Hall of Fame. What a great honor. Good for you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Well, it's taken me a lifetime, as you indicated. Actually, my involvement in public safety in the fire service started 47 years ago, while I was still in high school. I joined the volunteer fire department that my father was a member of, and in fact, my father, who served 64 years with the same department, and held the ranks of assistant chief and lieutenant, trustee, and commissioner. I joined that department in high school and actually worked my way up to chief. And that's a small department in suburban New York, or as I tell people, 2 hours or 20 minutes from Times Square, depending upon the time of day. But it's in lower New York State. And from there, and actually, I was attempting to become a career firefighter, in New York City, but was waiting for a test to come around and had sort of coincidentally filled out an application for a communications position with the local sheriff's office, who actually dispatched fire as well. Got a job there, and 16 years later, when I left to move to Illinois, I was in charge of that operation as the chief dispatcher. So that's really kind of how I got my foot in the door. From there, I moved to Illinois and ran the 911 center out there, consolidated the police and fire dispatching. In fact, also started 911 in that location. And at the time, I was also training officer for the Savoy Fire Department, which is a suburb of Champaign. Left there, went to Alabama, where I worked in the private sector, but again in the public safety field, and was deputy chief of the Harvest Volunteer Fire Department. So that's sort of the fire service route. The rest of it took me through Knoxville, Tennessee, and again, Raleigh, North Carolina. And in terms of writing, I published my first article nationally in 1972 and have been at it since then. So that's essentially what's gotten me into the Firehouse Hall of Fame. I've published more than 250 articles in that period of time in a variety of publications, and I'm still working on them today.
Excellent. Wow, what a journey. What a journey. You know, so unique. It's just like so many other fire service professionals and people I've talked to, and people, you know, how many started out in their local volunteer fire department that dad or grandpa or an aunt or an uncle were a member of, and just an incredible journey for you. And that could fill volumes, I'm sure, but not just a great journey, but just great experience. And such accolades were well deserved last month in Nashville. So just fantastic.
Well,
so, one thing though that comes to mind when we talk dispatchers and we talk communication centers, and I'd like to see if you agree with the stigma that in a lot of cases they don't get the recognition that I think they should. I don't say that just because I've been doing it for 25 years, but there's just too many people take it for granted that there's someone on the other end of that radio ready to give them the information, dispatch them to the call, help the caller that needs help, and they really don't get the recognition in a lot of cases that they deserve. And there's a lot of people that think in the general public that they basically just answer the phone and push a button and that's it.
Yeah, I certainly tend to agree with Tom, and I think a lot of people in the profession would. Part of it, unfortunately, I think comes from the days when dispatch was staffed in part by what I call the 4 L's: the lame, the losers, the leaving, and the lazy. And by that I mean if folks got perhaps an on-the-job injury that needed a little while to heal, the philosophy was, we'll stick them in dispatch for a while. If people weren't coming up to their expectations in the field, well, we'll put them in dispatch where we can keep our eyes on them. If somebody was coming close to retirement, well, we don't really want good old Joe to get hurt. Well, let's put him up in dispatch for a while. So to some degree, dispatch used to be a place to put people that you didn't know what to do with. That's changed, but somehow that stigma hasn't. In some states, you actually need to have you need to have a cleaner criminal background and have a more stringent background check done on you as a dispatcher than as a police officer. So I think that does kind of show the importance that falls upon people in this position. However, just today, I got an email saying that the federal OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget, once again has failed to reclassify telecommunicators as protective service employees, instead stating that they should remain in their clerical classification. Now, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against anyone who's doing a secretarial or a clerical job, but in how many of those jobs will a typographical error potentially cost somebody their lives? The amount of detail that has to be paid by telecommunicators. I mean, imagine if you even change something as simple from street to avenue, you can send resources to the complete other end of town.
Mm-hmm. Buffalo, New York had a poster child for that back in the 70s before there was a 911 system in place. Not to get off target, but that exact situation happened where the resources were sent to a Victoria Avenue. I could be wrong with the street, but it was a place or an avenue, and the resources went to one, and the incident was at the other, and there was a murder. And
I think
poster
the case
child for our area.
Yeah, I think the case you're referring to is known as DeLong versus Erie County. If anybody wants to look it up, because you can probably still find it on the web somewhere. But yeah,
I'm sure.
there have been, obviously there have been several of those. But the amount of information that has to be gathered and processed, the amount of training that goes on in many 911 centers, not just the initial training, but the ongoing training as policies and procedures change. People should remember that when a law enforcement agency or an EMS agency or a fire agency changes their boundaries, their units, their response levels, the way they handle a call, those changes have to be reflected in the policies of their dispatch centers, and they have to get there through training. So this is something that's not static by any means. There needs to be a significant amount of initial training as well as ongoing training to keep the employees current.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that just gets into so many things that municipalities have to make sure they're doing, because it's just such an important role. And the one thing you can't have, which unfortunately I read about happens quite a bit, is you put that amount, if it's being done correctly, the amount of training and resources in recruiting and training your dispatchers, only to have them leave after a short while. And why is that? Burnout, poor pay, factors that may or may not be under our control, right?
Yeah, and it's a nationwide problem that I frankly call a pandemic, because it is so widespread and it is so long-lasting that I know very few people who will raise their hand and say, yeah, we have enough people to handle our 911 calls. Now, interestingly enough, statistics show that only 3% of people who begin their careers as a call taker or dispatcher remain until retirement. Now, that's just a horrendous number, and I know of very few other careers that can say that. 3% or less people who start retire from that position.
Wow. That is astonishing.
Yeah, and the shorthandedness is something that, and the turnover, it's gone on for decades. I participated in APCO, which is the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials International. I participated back in 2000 in Boston in their first, what was known then as a staffing task force. And that has since moved on to Project Retains and Pro-CHRT and some other acronyms that have been developed over the years. But unfortunately, in that almost 20 years, there hasn't been anything that I can point to as significant problem with this issue. And we talk about training, staffing, pay, why are things this way, work environment, work hours. Again, number one, unfortunately, most centers are, when they are fully staffed, are typically only fully staffed for the, quote, average, unquote, day, which means that any significant event can sort of knock them out of their equilibrium. And second of all, I've recently looked at the fact that why did the rise of wireless 911 and wireless telephony coincide with when we first started to notice shortages in our 911 center? And I think one of the reasons is that I really do think that there is a link between the workload created by wireless 911 and our ability to staff centers.
So you think there's an increase in the work because there's so many cell phones and other ways of getting a hold of communication? So do you have more people calling in the emergencies and overloading the centers?
Exactly. One of the things, and again, the first center that I started at, Tom, was 10-digit number, or back then 7-digit number. 911 had been invented and was in place, but when I became involved in public safety in the fire department in 1970, 911 was only 2 years old and really only covered a few pockets in the country. The first 911 centers obviously followed your conventional telephones, which back in the day were wired into the wall and weren't going anywhere. And back in those days, if you, for example, needed assistance on the limited access highway or were somewhere out on a very rural country road, you were hopeful that somebody would come by to see your problem and either go to the next farmhouse or pull off at an exit and find a payphone and call the police or call the fire department or call for an ambulance or call for a wrecker. So, again, cell phones, it's terrific. I can call myself now if I've got a problem, or there's going to be 100 people going by that are going to call in the problem. But that creates the other issue, that in the past where perhaps there were a handful of calls, even on a major fire incident, there are now dozens, if not hundreds, on the same call. And what that does is, number one, it really creates times in the day when it's almost impossible to have enough people in the 911 center to answer that cluster of calls. And secondly, the pressure that it creates on the center to make sure you get and process all those calls is tremendous. I've managed 911 centers that covered major interstate highways. And believe me, when you have an accident or a fire on those highways, you got a number of calls, dozens, hundreds, as I indicated, for one single incident. However, each one of those phone calls during that time had to be answered because, number one, there's no assurance that the 13th phone call that comes in is for that accident and not for someone reporting a fire completely on the other end of town, or that, number two, this accident or event on the interstate has not caused a secondary event further back in the line of traffic, or perhaps a rubbernecking event on the other side of the street.
Absolutely, yeah. And even if it's not a emergency, even the smallest little event going on can prompt 20 or 30 wireless calls to come in to report it, and you can't always be staffed for that. You're right. And then with the staffing issue, you get into if the wrong person does walk into the center and happens to see three dispatchers or call takers at that particular moment not being overwhelmed, they think to themselves, why are we so overstaffed here? Isn't there anything else they can be doing? And I always used to liken it, Barry, to a police officer on the road. They could drive around for 2 hours without a call or an incident, looking for activity, of course, but they could go a few hours with nothing, and then all of a sudden it hits the fan. That's kind of like it is in a communication center. You just never know when it's going to come. So you might walk in.
We always joke
that
if you that's okay, I'm sorry. If you wanted it to be quiet, you needed to have visitors come in that you were trying to impress.
Absolutely,
because it was like everything went dead. But the other thing is, and you mentioned it, it can be a minor incident that drives these numbers up. And
right.
when I first started, your Friday night shift and your Saturday night shift were, judged to be the busiest times because of the fact that you're going to have people going to different events, you're going to have people out drinking, this, that, and the other thing. One thing leads to another. But what we have seen in the modern world is that your afternoon drive times, when people are heading home and getting into many times minor traffic events, it drives the 911 call volume up higher than it does on a Friday or Saturday night.
Yeah. I want to get back to what you said just a little bit ago because I think it's so important, and I just want you to reinforce what you said because it's interesting. You were talking about how they just characterized or categorized the communication center workers in the clerical type of profession. Can you talk about what was happening there and what they were trying to do to get their categorization upgraded to protected, or what was the word you used there?
Protective services.
Protected, right? Yeah.
Yeah, protective, which is not to say that, and there were several different agencies, including AFCO, working on this for about the past year or so, and largely trying to do so as a result of the ongoing issues with retention and trying to attract people to the profession. I mean, one of the things is that this isn't necessarily considered a glamorous profession. How many people grow up with the dream that, I want to be a firefighter? Well, literally thousands. Now, how many want to grow up to be a dispatcher? Well, I don't know any kid that's raising their hand when you go out on the field day to kindergarten that says that. But, in the real world, you've got to try to make the position as attractive as possible to maintain individuals. And some of that comes from trying to get the position categorized correctly in the eyes of the federal government, because the Office of Management and Budget is the agency responsible for, trying to place all different jobs into appropriated and related categories? And, at this point, again, communications personnel are lumped with clerical personnel rather than others who are in a more protective role to the public. If, for example, those classifications could be changed, then at least you're one step in the right direction of saying, hey, at least a department of the federal government recognizes that these folks do have a special place in the response chain.
Yeah, I think that would be really important and help a lot of areas to maybe just give people the respect they deserve and hopefully entice more people to join the ranks and stay longer. And you know what I find and have heard stories about where, and what would bother me is the man-made separation between the first responders and the dispatchers or call takers. In other words, they play an important role too. I find the centers that are, and you correct me if I'm wrong with your experience, but the centers that have the best harmony, the best morale, and seem to really do well, they're treated like the team. They're part of the team. In other words, the police officers on the road, the firefighters on the road and in the firehouses, and the EMS workers all understand that they're all on a team together, and there's no arrogance that comes with whatever your particular job title is overshadowing the other job category. That you're all in it together, you all work together, and I find that those centers really operate pretty efficiently when you have that type of environment.
I could not agree with you more. In fact, I'll give you a couple examples from my most recent and hopefully final stop in management here in Raleigh, Wake, North Carolina. Number one, with regard to recognition of our services, the local chamber had a first responder recognition day every year, and they've done it now for 5 or 6 years. And they accepted nominations and invited all the groups, fire, police, EMS, and communications, to their breakfast and acknowledged a winner, so to speak, of that year's award based upon the information that was submitted. And it was either the second or third year that the award was given that our personnel won that award for their handling of a fatal tornado outbreak here in the community. So, number one, not only were the dispatchers and call takers invited as equals to this event, as were firefighters, medics, and police officers, but the committees, truly were open enough to recognize that, hey, wait a minute, their story this year really does show the teamwork and the dedication that we're talking about. But, maybe more important than that was the fact that our folks were routinely invited to both planning sessions and I'll call them post-mortems for the lack of a better technical term, but there were at least 2 occasions that I can remember. One was a recent situation where an entire block that was under construction in downtown Raleigh burned, and when the department did their debriefing on it, they had the dispatchers who managed that call participate in that debriefing. And a few years prior, there was in another one of the cities that we served a fatal explosion and building collapse at a manufacturing facility. And again, when that agency did their debriefing, the personnel who handled the call on the radio on our end were an integral part of that process. So if there's one thing that I can say today from our discussion to anybody who's out there is, don't forget to include your communication center both in your planning and in your debriefing. You cannot expect everybody on the team to be on the same play if they're not given access to the playbook.
Absolutely, and like I said earlier too, it makes them feel. I mean, it's important to feel that you're part of the team, and it just really does a lot for your own self-esteem and your own morale, and it really does help the center overall. And I can't agree with you more. And I'd like to remind people that this is Fire Engineering Blog Talk Radio, tonight's installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, and I am Tom Merrill, and inviting you to call in if you have any questions for Mr. Furey or myself. Please feel free, call in. The number to call is 760-454-8852, and we are talking all things communication center involved. How is your dispatch center doing? What are your challenges? What are your success stories? We would love to hear any. If you are out there, give us a call and share them with us. And again, thank you to Honeywell and DuPont and their FDIC Scholarship Fund for sponsoring tonight's episode. And again, you have until December 1st to nominate a deserving member of your department or a neighboring department from your community to attend FDIC All Expenses Paid in April, sponsored by the Honeywell DuPont Scholarship Fund. You can go to HoneywellDuPont-FDIC-Scholarship.com for more information. And again, the number to call if you would like, 760-454-8852. And continuing on with this great talk about communication centers, so let's say there's somebody out there that's thinking about applying for their local communication center, whether it's police, fire, EMS, or all three merged together, which we will, by the way, get into that discussion in a little bit. I call it the nasty C word, communication, or consolidation. Communication is one of them, too, but the nasty C word of consolidation, because we'll get into that in a little bit. But what do you think we're looking for? In your experience, who's made the best dispatchers, or doesn't it matter? Is it how they're molded? What would you say?
We could have another podcast and talk all night about whether it has to be a firefighter or someone with public safety experience or background. And really, my experience has been that it takes a unique individual, and people can come to this place from a variety of paths. Certainly, folks who grew up in a public safety family, and especially those who sat around and listened to the scanner growing up, have probably got a little bit of a leg up in that they've got a background and an understanding of the culture. However, that by itself is not the only thing. I've had great success hiring folks that have had public safety backgrounds, but I've also had great success in hiring people who didn't, but who had strong customer service skills, people who came from a sales background, people who came from a wait staff background. Believe me, somebody who can handle multiple orders, a lunchtime crush, and unhappy customers also brings a skill set that makes for a good telecommunicator. So in the end, it's really the person themselves and their ability to, it's called multitask. We used to call it chewing gum and walking at the same time, but somebody who's got to be able to act on a variety of different inputs, has to have quick decision-making skills, somebody who's not going to get flustered under pressure, because you quite frankly can be the last person that someone ever talks to in their life. I mean, there is that reality. And somebody, quite frankly, Tom, who's probably a type A personality. Now, you've worked in a comm
Mm-hmm.
center for a long time, and it seems to me that an overly high percentage of people that we work with are type A or borderline type A, in that they always want to be busy and they always want everything to be perfect. And I think those two attributes are among many that makes a good dispatcher.
Yeah, the multitasking is definitely one of the things that you can't overemphasize. As there's many dispatcher that's talking on the phone, then mutes the phone to talk on the radio while listening to the phone still, and then also listening to what's being said on the radio. Oh, and by the way, there's 2 other emergency calls coming in that no one's answering at that moment because the other people are tied up. And yeah, it definitely there's a lot, but it can also be very exciting at the same time. There's no doubt about it. And then there's the skills that we can help the dispatchers. We can help them learn how to multitask, and hopefully, if they don't come to the job with those customer service skills, we can work with them to let them know that we're dealing with people that, even though it may be minor to us, it's the worst thing that they've ever experienced, causing them to have to call 911 for help.
Oh, exactly. And one of the things that I have always tried to impress on my folks is that when people are calling 911, they're not having a good day. And as you said, it may seem like no big emergency to you or I, because we've heard thousands of problems that are worse, quite frankly. But yet, as you said, the person on the other end of the phone, this is the biggest problem that they've had all day, and they're counting on you to try to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what have you found that the first responders want from their dispatchers and telecommunicators? We want our telecommunicators to be able to multitask and have customer service skills and be sympathetic to the caller. So that we want them to be able to handle those calls in a professional manner. So that's what the people on the other end of the line would want. What do our first responders want from a good communications center?
Well, I think in some cases you can even have conflicting wants and needs, and this is some of what we touched on briefly prior to the show, is obviously first responders want the right information. They want the clear information. They want to know that somebody is sitting there listening to them to essentially protect their back if they're in trouble. And they also want things fast. Now, this is where the good information versus quick information debate begins. A lot of folks have gone over to EFD, which is Emergency Fire Dispatching Protocols, and EMD, which is Emergency Medical Dispatching Protocols, meaning that there are a list of scripted questions that are asked to most, if not all, callers to determine who gets dispatched, essentially. Now, to start off with, some of the EMD protocols that are out there, and I'll be honest about this, were developed for communities that were having trouble keeping enough paramedic resources or advanced life support units free, because they found that they were sending them to stub toes and runny noses and everything else. So some of the protocols on the EMS side started really as resource management as much as providing good service. Now, on the fire side, many fire service officials that I've heard have bristle at the amount of questions that are asked, and I've had callers bristle. I've heard callers bristle at the amount of questions that are asked. But again, this is kind of one of those, you can't have it both ways, or, where do you draw the line? Well, yeah. First of all, one of the oldest jokes, if you want to call it that, with regard to fire dispatching is, it's car fire. Well, the car's in the garage. The garage is in the basement, and the basement is in an occupied multiple dwelling. Well, unless you've asked those questions, you're sending people to a car fire. And your response is going to be different. And like it or not, the attitude of the crew that's going is probably going to be a little different. So there's got to be a certain amount of questions that are asked to make sure you get the right rigs on the street. Now, should you ask every single question under the sun when you get information that, hey, it's a structure fire and somebody's trapped? Okay. Well, you can talk to the folks who design these protocols, but most facilities that I'm aware of have what I will call a bypass system for such contingencies, where there are some trigger words, on both the fire and EMS side that say, we're getting somebody on the street while the rest of the questions get answered. And
get them going.
I think, get them going. And I think that really makes the system work the way it's supposed to work. Now, in terms of answering calls, NENA, or the National Emergency Number Association, says that 90% of 911 calls should be answered in 10 seconds. And a lot of people hang their hats on it. But we're just talking about the answering process here now, Tom. But the other thing that statute says that people kind of overlook is it says at the busiest hour. Now, I can maintain a 90% average throughout the day and still tank in that busiest hour, and
sure.
that makes me non-compliant. Now, the NFPA looks at it a little bit different, and Standard 1221 of the National Fire Protection Association, which deals with comm centers and communications equipment in general, says that the processing should be 90% of calls should be processed in 64 seconds. But then they go on to say, except in these cases. And as a communications manager, I can tell you that the exceptions that they provide cover most of the calls that come into the 911 center. So, even by a standards system, there can be some discussion as to whether you are compliant or not. But then secondarily, you can get into an even deeper discussion to say, what do standards regarding communications mean if they are not enforced, or if no one has the power to enforce them? And that's
right.
One of the things that you will see. The NENA language, although it's known as a standard, is not codified, in most states, that there is some enforcement power going to come down and take action against you if you don't make it. And the same with NFPA 1221. Now, perhaps if you're in a state where there's an ISO, Insurance Service Organization, NFPA tie, and they're doing some good rating, and they find out you don't make this, are you at risk for losing one of the 10 points that you get from communications in your community grading schedule? Perhaps, but the bottom line is there's some great standards out there, but, none of them get enforced. But I've kind of taken this away from your initial question, and I apologize. Let me back on track saying that, I think it's, you want to get the right information, and you want to get the quick information. But then again, which of those two is more important? A lot of people, time, we need to get out the door. We need to get out the door quick. And I often ask, other than rookie school, when was the last time anybody timed you getting your turnout and helmet on? Because to me, 5 seconds or 10 seconds in the dispatch center is no different than 5 or 10 seconds in the field. And you've got agencies that now, rightly so, stop at red lights, or at least slow down significantly at red lights, and some folks who are not even running lights and siren at all. So
right.
to me, if time, this time is the big thing we got to worry about. Well, okay, then we should be going lights and siren to everything and blowing through red lights if that's the case. Yeah, so to me,
I was just gonna say the scripted questions and all. I think I hate to sound so basic, but the only word I can come up with, there's got to be some common sense. In other words, we can all agree, and as a dispatcher, I can definitely 100% say this is important, that there are certain questions that our dispatchers or call takers definitely need to ask. And the EMD, Emergency Medical Dispatch Program, is very good at giving you those questions for the medical side. EFD, yeah, they give good questions as well, but there's got to be a fine line then that the questioning stops, at least momentarily, to get units going. And what I mean by that, I'll use my own personal examples because that's all I really know. The way our comm center is set up, there's a call taker and a dispatcher. The call taker processes the 911 call and ships it over to the dispatcher to dispatch, tone it out, talk on the radio. If it's a cardiac arrest, a choking, a house fire call, chances are the dispatcher, because he's looking at the screen at the call coming in, is already processing and toning that company out before the call taker even hangs up. That's an example of where speed is important and where dispatchers working together like that is the best service possible for that person needing help. Now, at the same time, if it's a smell of smoke and the call taker takes a few minutes to say, "What do you see smoke? And if so, what color is it or what part of the house it is?" the dispatcher might not be toning that resource out yet because the resource requirement might not be as urgent or as many units needed. So does that make sense? So there's got to be a fine line there where these questions are important, but so in many cases is getting the resources out timely and efficiently, or efficiently but maybe not so timely because we have to ask a few more questions.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree with you, Tom, and I think we know which calls really do require the double step. And you talked about the heart attack difficulty breathing or the structure fire, especially the structure fire with entrapment or potential entrapment. And those are the calls that, as I said, most of the large centers I know of, including ones that I've managed, had some trigger words that when you came upon those, you got somebody going while somebody else finished the script, as you said. And then, too, I have had, well, first of all, when we began EFD here, I certainly made sure that the local fire chiefs had a vested interest in it, where they participated in the formulation and review of the questions and continued quality assurance review of that program as it went on, because there has to be that same kind of understanding from the folks in the field that, hey, wait a minute, no, this is not unduly delaying those calls where life is known to be at risk. That's number one. But secondarily, I have argued with medical directors over some of the questions that were added to the script, because in most cases the protocols come from I'll call it a licensing agency, and those are the folks who have developed them. But then there's some sort of a local oversight committee, board of fire chiefs, medical director, hospital, something like that custom tailors and approves them for the locality. And one of the big discussions that I got into was the addition of the question on the EMD side, is there a defibrillator available? Or do you have a defibrillator? Which I guess is, in my simple mind, okay, if you're in a big public space, office building, school, gymnasium, something like that, where they may be one. But, we would get calls from people's private homes. And, I guess in my sense, number one, if you had one in your house, you had it there for a reason, and you probably knew why. But secondarily, we had at least one case that I know of where a woman thought we asked if she had a refrigerator, and became very indignant that why are we asking her about a refrigerator while her husband's having a heart attack? So I mean,
Lord.
sometimes you add questions that make sense to perhaps the folks who are looking at the picture at one level, but not to the folks who are looking at the picture down there in the trenches. To me, this was just a question that didn't need to be out there.
Yeah, for sure. And as far as the good traits of a dispatcher, being able to ask the right questions, the important questions, get the call processed in a timely manner. A lot of things they can do now as the call is progressing to make the first responders safer. I think most of our listeners probably know, as you do, Barry, that there's more than one documented case of the dispatch center being the person on duty hearing the Mayday call that the incident commander or fireground people didn't hear. So I think it's important is looking at traits not only for hiring dispatchers and training them. Then good dispatchers, they're not done when they just hit those tones, are they? There's a lot more they got to do and should be doing.
Yeah, no, and there's I guess a couple things down that path. Number one is really try to encourage people not to develop tunnel listening. We talk about tunnel vision. Or target fixation on the fireground. Oh, the fire's coming out of that window. Let's all go squirt water in that window. No, that's not going to help in a lot of cases. The same thing is, sometimes you will see a call taker just blindly stick to the script or think that they heard something that somebody said that influences the rest of the conversation and takes them down the wrong path. Number one, I never would get over, reviewing calls where the caller said, "Oh, gee, my father came in and said to me he's having chest pains," and the call taker says, "Is he alert and conscious?" Well, okay, great. That may be what's next on your card. But does that make sense to the person who's calling you? Well, yeah, he's alert and conscious. I just told you he came in here and talked to me.
Right.
But with regard to the dispatcher being the backup to listen for the Mayday, that is so crucial. But I would encourage all of your listeners, Tom, to check with their dispatch center to see if that, in fact, actually happens. Now, under NFPA, again, 1221, we'll go back to that, and I'll paraphrase. There is language in there that says that the dispatch center should assign someone to monitor an event at the request of the IC. And again, that's paraphrased. But knowing the staffing level in many centers, I would truly, if I were out there on the street today, have someone of my officers, chief, check with the dispatch center and see if this actually happens. Or in addition to their monitoring it, if indeed someone is assigned to that channel, what else is going on in that channel, and what else are they doing? Are they monitoring 3 or 4 other channels? Are they still responsible to answer a 911 phone? If someone calls up and they are in the middle of providing CPR instructions, for example, and you call a Mayday, what happens then? So those are the kinds of questions that in terms of getting to know each other, I think is very helpful, and that's that the responders don't we talk about not underestimating the capacity of the communication center, but not overestimate the capacity as well. If you have radios that have got an emergency button, what happens when you hit them? Does it go to a particular channel? Does it stay on whatever channel you've been assigned to? Because again, and what shows up on the screen, if indeed they are programmed that way, because the key there is programmed. All these emergency button features, if you have one on your radio, are based upon local programming in terms of how they operate. So, add to your list of things that you can check is, hey, what happens when I push an emergency button? Who hears it? Where do they hear it? Where does it show up?
Yeah. Hey, there's an idea right there. How about making a dispatch center, involving them in some fire training and drills? Make them part of the drill night.
Exactly. It's got benefits that most people don't even see. You can find some of these problems by that interaction. Again, if the dispatch center assumes that your department, for example, monitors a certain channel or operates in this particular fashion, you go to a drill and find out that they don't. Well, hey, wait a minute, it's time to fix the dispatch center's procedure. The same holds true in reverse. If you're assuming that the dispatch center can provide a service and they don't, now's the time to find out. Great old film from back in the probably 70s of a fire in one of the great mill towns up in, I think it was Massachusetts, and the deputy chief or chief calls the dispatch center and says, hit the recall siren or sound the recall siren. And the dispatch center says, we haven't had that for years. And so, these are the types of resource and procedure issues that you find out in training, not out on the street at 3 o'clock on Sunday morning.
Yeah, and again, the dispatch center is, right there, part of the team with the firefighters, so why not train with them and work with them? And also leads me to get to know them. I always encourage in our area, firefighters stop up, get to know the dispatchers, sit for a bit, see what it's all about, see what goes into the job. And I think most centers are open to that, and they make it part of recruit orientation and make it part of a drill or training night. Go on up to your dispatch center.
Well, yeah, it's terrific, and I don't know many who are not, certainly open to that idea, like you said, Tom. I mean, I think ride-alongs are great for new communications personnel, and sit-alongs are great for new firefighters. Yep.
Conversely, like you said, especially if you're getting dispatchers that maybe aren't well versed yet in the emergency operation field. Yeah, take them out on the road. Let them see what it's all about. And hey, folks, again, this is Fire Engineering Talk Radio, professional volunteer fire department. Tonight, talking with Barry Furey about emergency communication centers. If you'd like to call in, the number to call in is 760-454-8852, and we would love to hear from you. And Barry, talking about good things dispatchers do, in addition to listening, I had jotted myself a little note, airlines. And what I mean by that is there's a reason that airline pilots and control towers repeat information, isn't there?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's to make sure that you got it right, and listening skills are extremely critical, as are appropriate communication skills, and I mean that includes repeating, as you mentioned there, Tom, the use of phonetics, the use of full unit numbers, and that's on both sides of the microphone, and of course now. We go into the new age of plain text, and as folks under NIMS move away from 10 codes and more towards plain text, it's also critical that we try to work on calling things by the same name, because there's another little catch to plain text, is that I know some people will call a particular type of vehicle a tanker, while others call it a tender. If you're up in Boston, a Jake is a firefighter. I think if you're in the rest of the world, Jake is some guy who works for State Farm and wears khaki pants. I'm not sure, but we've got to be sure as we move over to plain text that we're all on the same page of that as well. But yeah, some real basic skills can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and you're seeing less and less of the 10 codes out there. I know, obviously, FDNY's the major company that's department that still uses 10 codes, but there's been movement toward the plain text over the last decade or so, hasn't there?
Yeah, and I think as you start to look at public safety communications initiatives more on a nationwide scale and less on a local and regional scale, you'll probably see more of that come about. If you take a look at the technology that's on the horizon, you have what's known as Next Generation 911, which will not only bring voice to the dispatch center, but text, and that has started in many areas, but things like video, still pictures, crash information from the vehicles, how many times has it rolled over, is it on fire, how many people are in the car, intelligent highway systems, basically anything that has got the potential for connectivity can and will become part of what I call a 911 event, because it'll no longer be a call. And then you've got the FirstNet on the radio side, which a majority of states have now signed up to be a part of. Just recently, they've gone over the 50% number of states, and the FirstNet is a initiative to create a nationwide interoperable public safety communication system. Although the system that it results in will likely more resemble cell phones than the local radio devices and networks that we know today.
Excellent. Now, so you called that, what was it, FirstNet?
FirstNet, yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's excellent. That's something I didn't know, and very interesting. Barry, we talked a little bit about some training for our dispatchers, which in my opinion should never end. We should be staying on top, just like we want firefighters and police officers and EMS providers to stay on top of their craft. Dispatchers should stay on top of their craft by subscribing to some of the service publications, trade journals and such, or watching online for that type of stuff. But how, in your opinion, since you've been a supervisor for so long, when we take a step up and we're now supervising a center, it's a different animal, so to speak, isn't it? There's got to be some other skills that are required, and not just babysitting, I get that, but technical skills and things that, what would make a good supervisor in a center?
Well, the skills that make a good supervisor are not necessarily the same skills that make a call taker or a good dispatcher. Now, there are certainly a shared set of skills. I think that someone who is totally bereft of any procedural or equipment knowledge has got a fairly tough road to hoe ahead of him or her. But when you really talk about supervising and management, you're talking about a deeper understanding of the equipment, perhaps, in that you really need to get deeper into not only how it works, but what to do when it doesn't. Although, frankly, I think as a whole, we do not run enough failure drills in communications. But secondly, your skill set really needs to turn a lot towards people, because, every once in a while you're going to be called on to mediate or step in a procedural problem. But I can tell you, for all the years that I spent on the director level, I spent more time dealing with what I consider to be personal problems than I even did with technical or personnel problems. It's not even so much being the babysitter, but that, there's a good part of your time needs to be put forward toward taking care of your people, to making sure they've got a good working environment, to make sure that you've got procedures in place, to make sure that they're trained, to make sure that they've got a reasonable amount of creature comforts at work. And in fact, you had talked to me earlier about new 911 center construction. What's some of the big things? Well, obviously, outside of the technical and technical issues and security and making sure you've got enough space, because I've just built a couple of them in the past decade, but making sure that you've got the creature comforts in there, a big enough kitchen with more than one microwave, so there's not a line at the microwave, and people, it's silly things like that. So there's not a line at the microwave of people waiting to heat up their soup. To make sure there's enough refrigerator space for people to keep their lunches. Quiet rooms. We've built quiet rooms into a couple of 911 centers, and that's one of the new things, is where people can go and decompress if they've had a bad call, or they just want to take a break and get away from everybody. A very nondescript room with a recliner and maybe a phone if they need to make a phone call, and maybe a TV and maybe not a TV, but just their own little place that they can get away from things for a while and decompress. So looking out for some of those kinds of issues are what comes with being, I think, a good supervisor.
And as a supervisor, did you find that dispatchers preferred an 8-hour shift, a 12-hour shift? I don't know if many are doing 24-hour shifts, but did you have any input on shift schedules and what maybe you found to be the ideal schedule, or is it what the center worked best for them? Like in my center, we do a lot of switching. But it works, and as long as it doesn't create overtime or do something illegal or unethical, the powers that be are okay with it. But it's harmonious then. People want to be there then because they're not missing their kid's soccer game or the event they needed to go to because their partner switched or their coworker switched with them. So did you find any shift schedules better than others?
I think your assessment of it is kind of what folks are used to or what works for you is the best. Places that work 10-hour shifts sometimes have a more complex schedule to try to manage the day, although it works in a lot of fire departments. You've got to remember that, again, telecommunicators don't come under the same work rules as firefighters do, so that does put a little crimp on what you can legally do with the schedule. Now, I have managed 8s and I have managed 12s. In one facility, I actually changed from 8 to 12, again, because of personnel shortages, and we could be a little bit more effective and efficient in our use of folks there. We got our staff back up, and I offered to go back to 8s, and people said to me, no way. We're used to the 12s now. We're at work longer on that day, but we're at work less days or fewer days than we were previously. We kind of like it the way it is. The biggest concern. The biggest concern that I've always had about 12-hour days is if you have to hold somebody over, how long can you do it in good faith? How long can somebody be sharp and effective on a console? Now, I'm not talking about, hey, the world is coming to an end, in which case it's almost like all the rules go out the window. But I'm just talking about your normal, hey, wait a minute, we've had 3 people call in sick on the day shift, and we're still trying to get people, to come in, and everybody just can't get up and go home. So, you've got that, but the folks in my last 2 stops I've used 12-hour shifts, and we experimented a little bit with, one schedule and another, and it seemed that most of the people who were on the 12s were happy with them again, because of the, yes, I worked more hours, but yes, I worked fewer days.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. My own center's been going through discussions. We do 8 hours, and it's about 50-50 with someone in to try the 12s, and then, of course, you've always got the municipality, too, looking out for overtime, and 12 hours could create a little bit of overtime. So it's interesting, and but you want to keep your people happy, too, because, again, recruitment and retention, just like in the volunteer fire service, can be difficult in communication centers. So, a lot of areas of the country, there's been the last 20 years or so, and you've mentioned it a couple times, and I call it the dirty C word, and that's consolidation. My area has resisted it. Very proud independent centers, but I know there are many success stories out there for county-operated centers that cover a lot of miles and a lot of people, protect a lot of people. So what's your take on consolidated centers? Is it important? There's got to be some things that are important to get people to buy into it. There's always an entity that I've heard the firefighters always feel that they get the short end of the stick when there's consolidation being done.
Well, that's because you haven't listened to the police, I guess. Because I think that the main issue that has to be overcome with consolidation is the toughest issue of all, and that's politics. There is typically never a technical problem that can't be solved. There's typically not a fiscal problem that can't be solved, but the politics are what make it tough. And I can remember a community that had some discussions about consolidating their police force. And it was a county that had several relatively small police departments, and there was a proposition put forth to create a county police force. Well, other than the obvious, you go from 15 different chiefs of police to one, there were all sorts of statements thrown out there about why this wasn't a good thing and how much it would cost. And one of the proposals put out dealt with, to do this, we would have to change out all, get all new police cars, get all new uniforms, get all new weapons. And if you really think about that, is that all needed in the first year, to get this to work? And the answer is clearly no, but politically there were, again, 15 police chiefs, or at least 14 out of 15, who figured, wait a minute, I'm not going to be police chief anymore. So I think one of the key things to making the consolidation work is to get a discussion, to get a buy-in up front, and to let the local municipalities know that they're going to have input. And myself, I'm a proponent of consolidation, but I also say let's take a clear and honest look at what the local conditions are. Now, if you are saying that there are 20 single-seat dispatch centers in a particular area, to me, I look at that as someplace that's being ripe for consolidation. Number one is that you've got to be more efficient at sharing the workload if you bring all these places together. There are just so many single-seat centers out there that, and I'll be honest with you, that scares me. Because if that person has a heart attack, you're not going to know about it for probably hours, or unless the phone rings and they don't answer it, and somebody's got a real problem that then can't be fixed. I saw somebody post the other night on one of these groups, one of the online groups, wanting to know what their agency's policy was for going to the bathroom. That they were a dispatcher they were assigned to a shift, and if they had to go and relieve themselves, they had to take a portable with them. And then they said, now I've remembered that I really need to take a pad and pencil with me so I can write down in traffic that I take while I'm in the bathroom. Now, I don't know what they did about the phones, but back in the day, honest to God, I saw centers that had phones mounted on the wall next to the johns because
Wow.
the dispatcher was expected to answer the phone because they were the only person there if they were back in the bathroom. So I think if you've got a lot of single-seat centers, consolidation just from a safety standpoint makes sense. On a larger scale, on the larger scale, the fact that we're having so much trouble finding people sharing those resources gets to be more and more sensible as we go down the street. Now, if you've got an area that has 3 or 4 centers that serve several communities each, maybe such a strong impetus isn't there. And in fact, maybe keeping 2 centers in an area instead of 1 isn't really a bad idea in terms of having a live, hot backup, even with next generation 911 and some other enhancements that will let call transfer work a little easier. Having 2 staffed centers in an area that are both capable of taking on the other's load if there's a problem, that's not the worst idea I've heard. But again, you got 15 single-seat centers in a community. I think you've really got to start taking a look at why you've got that.
And then, like you said, the important thing is good open communication. And you know what else would be important, and from what I've experienced, and people want to know they're going to have a job. And I think there's always be the fear that people are going to lose their job. And, it's like doing any change is hard. Change is hard, but if done correctly, you can smooth things out and help people through the process. So there are occasions where. Go ahead, Barry. I'm sorry.
No, Tom, you go.
I was just going to say, so there are occasions where, yes, consolidation would make sense if we have these single-seat centers or centers serving very small populations, and plus keeping up with the technology, it's hard maybe for communities to keep up with the latest and greatest technology due to the expense, where now if you have a shared consolidated center, the expense might not be as much of a burden on that community. So in some cases it does make sense, but in all cases, take care of the people. Take care of the people. Make them know that they're cared for. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And talk about recruitment and retention, I hate to even get into what's becoming more and more well-known in our field, just like it's becoming more and more well-known in the fire service field, and that's health of our dispatchers. Again, some people might roll their eyes and think it's nothing more than sitting in an office for 8, 10, 12 hours, pushing a couple buttons, answering a phone, saying, hello, where are we going? But there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of side effects health-wise that our dispatchers face. And at the same time, there's also some things we can do to help our dispatchers out. Again, you mentioned earlier, right at the beginning of the show, the mental health aspect of hearing someone having a really bad day. And for all the time, sometimes we might mute the phone and laugh at a situation going on because it is a cat in a tree or something like that. We do hear people taking their last breaths. We are sometimes that person, the last person that the caller talks to before they pass away. We do hear people trapped in vehicles and in fires. We are on the phone talking to a mother who just pulled her child out of the swimming pool and is drowned. I could go on and on. The mental aspects are unbelievable in the lack of sleep due to these long shifts or covering shifts when somebody's ill. And then the eating disruptions and the poor eating habits that dispatchers may have. It just goes on and on. So anyone out there aspiring to be a dispatcher, they probably just said, not for me. But it is something to be reckoned with, isn't it, Barry?
It really is. And I mean, not to belabor the point, I can tell you that I stopped in to say hello one Christmas morning to a group of folks who were working in the center I managed, and one of the first calls they got was a gentleman who had picked his son up from his wife who had custody, went downtown to the bridge, jumped in the river, and killed them both on Christmas morning. So this is
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Everybody in the center that day just had the air let out of them. So there is obviously this mental health aspect that you talked about, and I mean recent studies have indicated that dispatchers are subject to critical incident stress very similar to first responders because they're dealing with the same incidents, albeit not at the scene. However, from the dispatcher standpoint, there can be even another aspect thrown in there, and that is a lack of closure. Whereas first responders who are at the scene typically have some idea of what's happened, even if it's a negative outcome. They've got some closure. They've seen what happens. For many dispatchers, they will go from this tragic call, and 30 seconds later, the phone rings again, and they're off and on another event. So they may not know, or they may not find out later in the day what happened. But I talked to you earlier about next generation 911 and bringing video and photographs into the comm center. That's going to add a whole new level of stress because now not only are you going to get the audio, you're going to get the video as well. Couple that with the fact that cell phones have increasingly put 911 call takers in direct contact with the people in trouble. Years ago, it was not unusual for a call to be third party. Hey, somebody dropped by and they said the house 2 doors down is on fire. Well, now more than likely, because we've got a generation of folks who don't go anywhere without their cell phone, they're going to be the ones that they're talking to. And with Next Generation 911, they're going to be the ones who are generating streaming video of them being trapped in a car or in a burning building. So that's going to get worse. But again, the lifestyle, the hours, it is a very sedentary profession. You are not working outside. You are not lifting. You are not carrying. You are pretty much sitting for 8, 10, or 12 hours, as we talked about. Your diet tends to be compromised by the fact that there is one of the most important documents maintained by any 911 or dispatch center is the list of restaurants in the area that deliver. They are not necessarily all the best choices, but that's what you'll be eating. One of the things that we've tried to do to counteract it in our latest facility that we built here, there was actually an exercise room on the premise. It certainly was nothing to compete with Gold's Gym, let's say, but it did have some basic workout equipment where if you on lunch hour or break wanted to go down and try to burn off some of the stress or some of the calories, you had an option to do that. Plus, you had the option to go, as I indicated, to the quiet room. Plus, there are also covered outdoor break areas where, regardless of the weather, if you really wanted to get out of the building, you could go to. So those types of outlets really do need to be provided. And peer counseling. If there's anybody out there who is a dispatcher, call taker, telecommunicator, whatever you want to label you want to wear, and you feel like you are in a rut or are burned out or need help, please get it, or at least talk to somebody and share your feelings, because certainly you're not the first one to be going through what you're going through.
Right. And For our listeners out there that again, just to reiterate a couple of things that we talked about, the nature of the emergency call is going to place our first responders definitely at a risk for harm or injury or even death themselves. And so the dispatcher doesn't maybe get directly involved at the scene, but they're exposed to so many of the same mental and emotional traumas that these first responders experience firsthand. And as a result, they really are at a risk for occupational stress. And again, coupled with working in a sedentary position, sitting most of their shift, it's important to realize the stress they're under. And I find it interesting, we say all this, but even though they're facing a lot of these same traumas and emotional aspects on their health, they can't be classified the same as these other first responders. I just don't think that's fair. And it's something that we definitely, as a profession of communicators and dispatchers, want to really maybe work on and continue to push for. And here's something that I found interesting too, and this is depressing. A study last year showed 82. You talked about the 3% who will start the job and follow through to retirement. How's this statistic? 82% of emergency dispatchers have a body mass index that falls in the category of overweight or obese. 82%. So we've got to take care of ourselves. We work with other professionals. Let's talk about it. Work together. What can we do? You mentioned the exercise room. Fantastic. The quiet rooms to decompress. Absolutely a great idea. Let's make better food choices. Instead of ordering out, bring your own food in. Limit your intakes of fats and sugars, and get up and move around the center, Barry, right? I'm seeing nice little treadmills now that are, anybody out there, call in. Let us know what you're doing. I'm considering it for our center, at least proposing it, where I like to walk, and I do run on my off days, but how great it would be to have a little treadmill right there at your workstation where you can walk for an hour. At 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. I'm not talking running where you're getting into a full workout sweat, but at least you're moving and doing something to help yourself out, because there's a lot of hazards to the job. Yes, it's not collapsing buildings, and it's not the smoke or the guns that the law enforcement are facing and the smoke that the firefighters are inhaling, but these are other very real stressors and dangerous parts of our job that we need to reckon with, and the modern dispatch center should do that. Correct, Barry?
I couldn't agree more, Tom.
And you mentioned some of the must-haves. If you were putting a center together, you've helped build centers. And I like how you mentioned an adequate-sized kitchen. For sure. A coffee pot that is on 24 hours a day, I think, is a must-have. And but quiet rooms. And what are some of the other things that if you were going to build a center today or remodel your center, or even just you're listening tonight and you say, I want to do some better work for my dispatchers, you're a supervisor, what can you do to make a better center, both construction-wise and maybe not even construction-wise, but internally, personnel-wise? What should we be doing?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you don't have dedicated space to set aside for some of these things that we've talked about, try to make some. Is there currently some unused space that's, really not being used for much of anything that could become a quiet room or just a place for somebody to go and get away? Do you have an outside area that is, reasonably secured and close to the building where you could even set up a picnic table or a barbecue grill where folks could just go outside and get some fresh air and get some sun and, maybe, have a hamburger or something like that instead of a TV dinner or something that they microwave. In terms of what you do inside the center, I always see posts from folks complaining about morale in their center and wanting to know what to do to improve it. And I will say this is, sometimes very, very tough to do, but one of the first things that I typically tell people is that morale always starts with you. That you've got to get the proper mindset and focus on your job. And if there's a really old saying that if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. There are a lot of fairly easy things that can be done, and a lot of them are very low cost or no cost. Around the holidays, if you typically wear uniforms, see if there can be some exemption for particular holidays where you might be able to wear casual clothing. Or if you don't wear uniforms even, think of perhaps some other things that you can do. I mean, we've done in the past at various centers, dress up for Halloween or Pajama Day or Crazy Hat Day or something like that, just to break the monotony. I've known people who play a game that they call 911 bingo, and at the beginning of the shift, everybody is given a card with various call types spread around the card, and every time they take a call or handle a call on one of those call types, or somebody on the phone or radio says one of the phrases included, they get to cross it off, and they give them some silly prize for winning bingo that day. Bulletin boards that allow people to pat each other on the back. Again, what's a bulletin board and some index cards cost to let people post things if they've caught somebody doing good, or even a bulletin board where you post commendations or attaboys that come from citizens and other agencies. Put them in the center, put them in the hallway, put them in the locker room, put them someplace where everybody's going to see them. But hey, wait a minute, the feedback that we get isn't always negative, because that's one of the big morale killers, in addition to the lack of fiscal recognition, is that many telecommunicators feel that the only news they hear is bad news. Oh, geez, what's somebody complaining about now? And you really need to try to break that cycle so that, every contact with administration is not negative. Wait a minute. It's not, wait a minute, all right, what did I do wrong now? It's like, oh, okay, I wonder what's happening. And a much better attitude.
Yeah. It's 2017, and I don't know where you stand on this. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I am going to, because I think it's important, and I'm in favor of it. And that's, again, it's 2017. Let's take care of our people. I find nothing wrong with having wireless technology available to you, and also a television set so you can have the sport game on, with the understanding, and this comes with proper training, with proper mentoring, with proper supervision, with the understanding, just like in our firehouses, when that call drops, everything is focused on doing a professional job for that call. But sometimes, let's face it, the dispatchers, they have a sedentary lifestyle. It could be a quiet shift. Why not have access to the wireless technology so they can communicate with their family, so they can help shop for something that their spouse needs, or enjoy the football or hockey game or baseball game? But again, that comes with understanding, supervision, that the call comes first and your job is the priority. But I think you can do both.
Well, I'm kind of in the middle on that, and let me explain to you where I come from. I certainly, and I'm old school. I was a tailboard rider, and when I started in dispatch, it was the old Jack Webb school of dispatching. Just the facts, man. Where are you? What's the problem? Good, somebody will be there. And that was, never mind all these fancy scripts. That was it. Where are you? What's the problem? Somebody's coming. In the facilities that I have worked on, all of our folks had access to television. And again, and I'm talking about, if they really wanted to, they could turn the entire video wall into the Super Bowl. But, I mean, it was up there with weather and traffic cameras and everything else. But as long as the job came first, and I had trouble, I will be the first to admit, I had trouble morphing into this viewpoint, because I always thought everything is a distraction, this, that, and the other thing. And I finally realized they can chew gum at the same time. We can certainly have the football game on or the basketball game or something. And to me that's great. We've granted people internet access where they can go, and certainly there's some protection on the sites because not only some people might not quite follow instructions, but there is obviously a potential for viruses that come from certain unscrupulous sites on the web. My concern about the wireless devices is, and I will say this as a communications manager, if I were approached by an attorney who said to me, Mr. Furey, can you attest to the fact that this is the only, that you have given me copies of every piece of communications that came and went from your center during a particular time? If all of my employees had cell phones, I would have to say no. And then that potentially leaves all those cell phones open to discovery. So I'm still working through this. I have heard some. I served on the APCO ANSI committee that established the social media protocols for PSAPs, and this is one of the issues that we dealt with, and heard some very scary stories, and I'll leave it at that. So personally, I've got to say, with that aspect of it, my part of that jury is still out. But in terms of access to the internet, and again, I said we've got break rooms that have got phones that are not on the recorded line. If somebody wants to take a break and make a call home, in all my years of management, I never had the time or the inclination to sit and go through all the tape lines to try to, quote, catch somebody doing something. If you want to call and give your kid the homework answer or say good night before they get tucked in, my God, I'm a parent. I understand that. I understand. So I'm still a little iffy on the cell phone issue, but I certainly think your folks do need to have some outlets and contact to the real world while they're in the center.
Yeah, good. Good discussion there. Good discussion. I got just a couple more quick questions for you. I don't want to keep you. We've been going a good hour and 45 minutes. Man, time flies. But if anyone had a last question they wanted to get in, please, the number is 760-454-8852. And we're about to wrap things up. But just a couple quick questions, if you don't mind, Barry. I hope you got a few more minutes. You mentioned it a couple times, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the show, and that's APCO. Can you explain what APCO is, and also as a communication center supervisor who might be listening, or just someone who is really interested in our profession of dispatching, what other organizations there might be out there that they can join and be part of to better themselves, and also just stay on top of what's going on in this great profession?
Oh, sure. Thank you. APCO is the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials International. They are the world's largest and oldest organizations of individuals who are in the public safety communications field with, as the name suggests, chapters and membership worldwide. Most of the states in the United States have their own chapter. However, some do have regional, such as New York falls in the Atlantic chapter, and you can definitely find them on the web, and I believe it's APCOINTL.org, APCOInternational.org. They do have training classes. They have been involved in the creation of several ANSI standards that impact telecommunications. That's a really good place to start. You might also look at the National Emergency Number Association, or NENA, NENA.org is their website. Again, their focus is more on the telephone side, whereas APCO looks at the big picture. But NENA has, again, developed many standards over the years that deal with 911. and telephones. I would also look locally to see if your state or region or county has a dispatcher-based organization. For example, Rockland County, where I started, has a fairly active group of people, and so you may well have a similar organization in your hometown or in your state, and those are some good folks to reach out to initially.
Oh, fantastic. Great information there. Fantastic information that our listeners could certainly take advantage of if they so desire. And one last question. We talked a little bit about some of the modern technology. Is are dispatchers going to be replaced? What do you see coming down the pipe? We are moving we're moving at breakneck speed with technology. Again, years ago, I liked how you referred to it as basically people that fell into the 4L category that were thrown into dispatching, the lame, the losers, the leaving, or the lazy, and told them to answer the phone, and they asked very few questions and sent whatever help they felt was necessary. And today we are dealing with just ultra-modern technology, soon-to-be video technology as well, phones that we can trace where somebody is within feet, and mapping technology. We're watching highway cameras to see the traffic patterns. We have interactive weather radar. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Is there always going to be a need for that human element in our dispatch center?
I think during our lifetimes there will always be. In the future, who knows? Because one of the things that I talk about when I go out and speak to groups is the fact that you don't know what technology is coming down the bend 5 years from now. When I first started in this profession, there wasn't any wireless phones. There wasn't wireless 911. There wasn't enhanced 911. Didn't use a CAD system. Our calls were not recorded. GIS, satellites, giving you the location. What was that? Didn't know any of that. So, in another 5 or 10 years, what will we know? It's hard to say, but I think there's a couple things that we, may see first, and that is you talk more and more about virtual call centers and about how many industries have gone to allow people to telework and work from their homes. And I think eventually you're going to, in fact, you've got it now, but it's just not widely used, is the ability for a 911 call taker to work from their house. Now, I'm not saying that initially that is the way that we'll start with virtual 911 call centers, because there is still a certain amount of information that, quite frankly, accidentally gets exchanged inside a 911 center, and that's another reason why I'm kind of big on consolidation, is I can't tell you how many times somebody at one console will overhear something that someone at another console says and put two and two together, and hey, wait a minute, that's got to do with what I've got going on here. So I hope that we never completely lose that. But as a 911 director, one of my toughest challenges was ramping up when an emergency came along. Now, if I knew bad weather was coming, I could schedule more people and make hotel arrangements if I thought they were going to get snowed in and do a variety of things. But wham, when that disaster hits and we didn't see it coming, how do I ramp up my services? And that's one thing that, again, I would ask that the folks in the field try to understand, is that as a fire chief, I had mutual aid. I got on the radio, and within 10 or 15 minutes, I had all the help I could ever need. If I were in another community, yes, hey, send me a second or a third alarm, and I'll sit back in 10 minutes, I got it. Whereas a dispatch director, you don't have that luxury. You've got the resources that you've got to work with on site, And maybe, just maybe, if you're lucky, you can get some folks back inside the hour. Because they've got to get there, and if it's a weather-related emergency, it's going to slow them down even more. The aspect of moving to the ability to add agents, so to speak, or add call takers from their house with software that thin client software, as it's called, that can reside on their computer, immediately make them part of the 911 system while they're sitting home in their pajamas, I think is probably going to be the next big technological advance that we see. But in terms of going completely automated, I think we can get some benefits out of moving more towards automation. But there's a couple things. Years ago, people actually suggested leaving 911 for police, and I can't remember whether fire got 912 or EMS got 912, but somebody suggested using 911, 912, and 913, and this was a serious suggestion. Now, part of that gets to be with any automated system, it's only as good as the education that goes along with it. Now, if I'm calling in an accident, okay, that's police. All right. But wait a minute, somebody's hurt. Oh, no, wait a minute, that's ambulance. Oh, but it's on fire. Wait a minute. So now do I have to call 911, 912, and 913? But I think you also have to look at the resistance of the public to decision trees and also offshore call centers, because there's even been discussions. If they take the local cable company offshore, why can't they take 911 offshore? Well, technically they can, but if you see the pushback that many companies are getting now to offshore centers and to decision trees that make you stay on the line for 15 minutes pushing a variety of buttons and then getting disconnected or sent to the wrong place anyway, I think the public acceptance of it would take longer to manifest than the actual ability to do it, if that makes sense. And I think that's what will slow it down, because going back to what you said earlier and what we talked about earlier about how this is the worst thing that's happened in a person's day, do you really want to dial 911 in here? Hi, welcome to 911. Your call is important. Please press 1 if. And I think the answer in most people's cases is clearly no. There is a comforting factor to hear a real human voice, whether it is to plead for that person for help or give that person what for, because they must have had something to do with this crisis that I'm experiencing now. You've got a human there. So I think that part of it, if anything, would delay the implementation of any true, no people in the mix type of service.
Right. Absolutely. And, again, it's just the people need to be served, and from the whole chain, from the initial call taker to the dispatcher dispatching the units to the first responders arriving on scene, and even into the post-incident, whether it's helping them at the hospital or helping them clean up after a fire. It's all about competent, compassionate, professional service, and that's the bottom line. And I think we covered things that maybe firefighters and first responders didn't know about their dispatch center, and then hopefully for the dispatchers listening out there and the communication supervisors, we gave them some information for some things maybe they weren't thinking of as well. And Barry, I can't thank you enough for your help tonight and taking the time to be on the show. We're going on almost 2 straight hours, and I know there's still some things that were on our list that we could have covered, so maybe we'll get you back another night to have a part 2. But if someone wanted to reach out to you, Barry, if they had questions for you or wanted you to come in and do a presentation or do some consulting work, what's the best way people can get a hold of you?
They can visit Barry Furey, that's my name, Barry Furey, Furey.com, or get me my email. My name again, Barry Furey, Barry Furey, all one word, at yahoo.com.
Excellent. Take advantage of that dispatchers and supervisors out there, and even firefighters, because it's a lot of information that he can provide, a lot of help he can give you. And Barry, again, we were talking about disc takers, even firefighters. How do you want to wrap this up, this conversation? What would you like people to take away from our talk tonight?
Okay. I'd like people to recognize and realize that the telecommunications personnel are a specialized part of the firefighting team, no less or no more than folks who belong to high-angle rescue, confined space rescue, or hazardous materials teams. It's a specialty, and again, it's part of the team. Without appropriate focus and training in the communications area, every other part of the firefighting team is less effective. So I would ask everyone at your local level to reach out to not the other side of the microphone, yes, but not to the other side. Reach out to the rest of the team and see how you can help each other better in the days to come.
Oh, fantastic. And let's take care of each other. Let's take care of our health. Let's take care of each other. Let's work together to provide the best service we can, because we're all part of the same team. And Barry, I got a few more things I gotta do on the show here tonight, but I thank you again for taking the time, and I look forward to seeing you at again future engagements and future shows and seminars down the road. And like I said, I have probably another 2 pages of questions that I could ask, and we'll do a part 2 someday. How's that sound?
We'll do it again next year. It sounds good, Tom. Thank you, and happy holidays to you and all your listeners.
Thank you very much, Barry. Same to you, my friend. Thank you. What a great show. So much to take into account when thinking about the communication center, the dispatch center, fire, whatever you call it. They want to be as professional as you do in doing their job, and there's a lot we can all do to help each other out. And I hope we shed a little bit of light on that tonight, and challenges that dispatchers face and communication centers face. And I just hope we shed a little light on that for everybody tonight. Reach out to me again at tamerrill63@AOL.com. Give my Facebook page a like, the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. I'm always posting interesting articles and inspirational quotes and things to help us along as we do this job of professional fire and EMS work. And thank you so much to Barry Furey for stopping on tonight or appearing on the show tonight. And thank you for listening in. And again, I encourage you to reach out to me, Facebook, Twitter, my AOL account. So much to share. And thanks to Honeywell and DuPont and the FDIC Scholarship Program for sponsoring the show tonight. Again, you have until December 1st to go online and nominate who you think would be a deserving member of your department to get an all-expenses-paid trip to FDIC in April 2018. It's going to be April 23rd to the 28th in Indianapolis. And again, Honeywell, DuPont, FDICscholarship.com is where you will find that information. And folks, we're entering the holiday season. And I know I've done this the last couple of shows in November and December, but we need to remember our fire service history. We need to remember the sacrifices that those that came before have made. We need to remember and learn from the horrendous events of years gone by, some of the terrible fires that have taken so many of our brother and sister firefighters and so many of the civilians that we are sworn to protect. And December, the holiday season in general, is a rough month in emergency services, and our history is filled with stories of sacrifice and tragedies. December 1st is the anniversary of the Our Lady of Angels fire, which was in Chicago. 92 children killed, 4 nuns killed. That was in December 1st. Same city, on December 22nd in 2010, we lost a couple firefighters in the Chicago Fire Department, and that was on the same anniversary of a stockyard fire, the Union Stockyard fire in Chicago that killed 21 firefighters. In my hometown of Buffalo, New York, we lost 5 firefighters on December 27th, 1983. 2 civilians were also killed when a propane explosion erupted as firefighters arrived to that call. I could go on and on. nothing worse even than the Worcester, Massachusetts fire of December 3rd, 1999, the cold storage fire, 6 firefighters killed. A fire in Keokuk, Iowa in 1999 that resulted in the death of 3 firefighters and 3 children. Terrible, terrible tragedies have occurred during the holiday seasons. I'm asking all of us to try to take care of each other, to be safe, and remember the sacrifices of those who came before. And tonight, this evening, November 28th, is the anniversary of the Coconut Grove fire, which was in Boston, Massachusetts. This was a horrendous fire that still ranks as the worst nightclub fire in American history. The 500 people were killed, and as a result of the fire, if there could be any good that came from it, a lot of the fire codes that we take for granted are a direct result of that horrendous fire. I think it was 492 people were killed that night. One of my own department members was at that fire. He's no longer with us, but he was in the Navy or the Coast Guard, and he was at that Coconut Grove the night of that fire, and he was lucky to get out, served in World War II, and he came back and served in our company for many, many years until he passed away several years ago, and he used to talk about that fire and how lucky he was to get out. Tonight is the 75th anniversary of the Coconut Grove fire that killed 492 people and led to sweeping changes to our building and fire codes. So if there's any good that came out of it, that is it. And one last thing as we end the show tonight, I haven't done a shout-out in a while, but I would like to give a shout-out tonight to a special firefighter, a special volunteer firefighter serving in a very special department. And this story comes to us from Frederick County, Maryland. There's a firefighter there who just last month turned 101 years old. And he's been serving with the department for over 40 years. Brubaker from the Urbana Volunteer Fire Department in Frederick County, Maryland. You're an inspiration. 101 years old, still serving. He says, you got to go, you got to go. It's something that's inside of you. You don't get tired. I've never used that word in my life, and I guess that could be so true. Some of his co-workers at the volunteer firehouse say they've never heard anyone say a bad word about this gentleman. He brings a good mood to everybody he meets. He lights up a room, and he even says he feels great about turning 101. He says, people seem a lot friendlier to me now. A lot of people actually want to shake my hand, and he can often be seen still in the kitchen at the Urbana Volunteer Fire Department in Frederick County, Maryland. And I give them and him my shout-out this evening for serving in such a dignified way. So I should be so proud of that. Hey, folks, my next scheduled show will be a Tuesday evening in 2018. I don't have the schedule yet, but I guarantee that I will be on, and I will be bringing more guests to talk about more great topics involving the volunteer fire service. If there's a topic you would like covered, want to have recommend a guest, please shoot me an email, Facebook message, and let me know, because I just want to serve you, and I want to continue to serve you to the best of my ability. So thank you for joining in tonight, and remember, wherever you're listening, that being professional has nothing to do with earning a paycheck. It has everything to do with delivering competent, compassionate service and taking care of our customers and our own members as well. And it's up to all of us, paid and volunteer, to develop, maintain, and uphold a professional reputation in our great fire service. Have a great holiday season, people. Stay safe, and I look forward to talking to you in 2018.